discussion. And there are several reasons as to why this panel discussion becomes so important. Very recently, we have come across the Oxfam report on global inequalities. That speaks for itself. That also tells us that we continue to live in a very unequal world. So the challenges that are there before the feminist international relations are not only about women's empowerment, they are not only about gender parity or gender equality, but I think it is all about making the humanity humane and reminding all of us that politics is not just about the power politics. The politics also has a very important moral and ethical dimension. We are very privileged to have with us Professor Anuradha, Chenoy, Dr. Shruthi, Muraleedharan, and Dr. Constantino, Xavier on the panel. Personally, I have been sort of deeply motivated by their contributions over long decades, I would say. And those of us who teach international relations, and we talk about post-colonial and global international relations, would appreciate that this is not only about critical international relations that you bring in the feminist perspectives, but it is also about very basic fundamental thinking of how international should be approached both ontologically, epistemologically, and even methodologically. I don't think post-colonial, anti-colonial, critical, global project will ever be complete if the feminist international relations and gender-sensitive international relations are not strengthened. With just these a few opening remarks, I would like to have the singular honor of introducing our first panelist, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, who in fact needs no introduction, but I still want to have that privilege and honor. She is very well known, highly respected academic teacher and writer, not just in international relations but in social sciences. Constantly reminding us through her work that international is not just interstate. It is very important to have a more people-centric understanding of what politics is all about and what it should be. She joined Jindal School of International Affairs as an adjunct professor in 2022 after nearly 4 decades of this illustrious career at Nehru University, where she retired as dean and professor at the School of International Affairs. I've admired you and known you for so long. She is an associate fellow of the Transnational Institute, chairperson of the Forum for Intergovernmental Cooperation from 2020 to 2020. She was a recipient of ICSSR and Fulbright Fellowship and full University of Columbia, New York. Just these few words.
Teachers get so used to standing and teaching best way to shut them up is from here.
Dean Chaturvedi, panelists, Constantino, Shweta Amena, and so many wonderful faces that I've seen thanks to our day after years, this audience, students, and friends. I'm deeply honored to have been asked by Shweta to speak at this very important moment of not just the release of her book, but a celebration of the the ideas of both South Asia, women and feminism, at this particular conjuncture. As you might know, recently, gender has been banned. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has been banned in one country, a very important country. You might know that. But they're here to say that they can't do it. And no matter what debates are in whatever state power and empire and non-empire says, these ideas will remain. And this is one major importance of this book, that it even challenges this kind of discourse coming from empire. Now, the second, I think, important thing is that, in South Asia, there are so many barriers that have not allowed us and do not allow us to meet often enough. At least they don't allow, they don't facilitate, or maybe that there are lesser possibilities of academics and students, etc., overcoming these barriers. But again, as you can see from this book, these physical barriers don't have to deter us, because the mental engagement, the engagement of ideas, the engagement of thought processes, of experiences, of anxieties, of desires will remain. And that is, I believe, in my own view, a more important engagement. And now technology also helps us overcome that, where we can engage through Zoom, etc. But the fact that, as the Vice Chancellor correctly said, that there is what he said, a physical output itself, it is a major achievement. And I want to congratulate again and repeatedly Shweta and Amena, my beloved friend, for decades, for having undertaken this. So, now I believe that you have to tell me, Sanjay, when I have crossed the time limit. This book, I believe, is a very organic endeavor. It is not an imposition of feminist theories. I am not discounting feminist theories anytime, they're important. But this book really, in all the essays, it uses the epistemology or the paradigms of feminism and how these can be day-to-day engagements and understandings, a kind of a common denominator, as it were, for understandings that all people can use. The other thing is that many of the words that we use as social scientists and as feminists today, like intersections, cartographies, geographies, locations, sites, these are actually come forth in this volume in a very, I would say, very comprehensive and sophisticated way. So this book intersects between the current, the past, so it historicizes, it contextualizes the current, and yet it doesn't look at the past with the lens of the present. It sees it, as it were. There are 2 or 3 essays in this which take from the fairly ancient or medieval periods, and I'll go into that. So it attempts an academic decolonization without saying so. So it doesn't brand these theories, but these come out very spontaneously. And I think the best example of what I was saying, I thought 2 essays, and those really moved me when I first read this book. By the way, I think Shweta knows that I was the blind reviewer for Routledge. I didn't know it was their book, but when I got it, I think I knew who it was. The editors were. And only after I submitted the review, I rang up Shweta and I said, "Was this your essay?" And she said, "Oh wow, yes." So it's not that I was biased, but I really appreciated how it was written because we always talk that we must look at our indigenous texts, that we need to sometimes challenge what's just coming as of Western or dominant or hegemonic information. And these two essays actually do this in a very spontaneous way, where Shweta looks at the Buddhist texts of the Therigatha poems, and through that she shows how women had to negotiate through the interstices of power, which is something we're still doing. You can see the connection, and similarly, how Afreen Rashid does it when she looked at the letters written at a time of a very serious succession crisis in in 1657, 69, and she shows how Jahanara Begum tried to persuade her father about which brother can be the right king. So again, what does that say about the modern concept of feminism? That feminism is about relationships of power, of unraveling these relations between the gendered relations of power, and that it was always there. It was just that now we have been able to give them appropriate labels. And persuasion was a strategic persuasion. Maybe our strategic community has not used that term yet, but it is there in those letters. It was a kind of strategic persuasion of who would be a better ruler. And you can transpose that to the current situation. Similarly, I think even Megha, I don't know if she's here, Megha Vish, who is also a student, she also does an excellent job of, she does a kind of a dialogue between the South Asian feminism and Western feminism. And she does it in a very, I would say, non-aggressive, which is a feminist way, a principle. Not saying, Western feminism opposing us or these white feminists versus black feminists. No, she does it that there are these strands and these are the thoughts, and there's a very rich tradition in all, not just South Asian, but all of the global South society, if you excavate these ideas enough. Then, I'll be very brief now. The sections on populism I thought were excellent also. And they show that both cases said that populism is essentially a masculinist exercise. I might have some disagreements on that. But because now populism is politics, so is all politics masculinist? It isn't. Of course, there are formulations one has to look at, but anyway, those are very good. They're very good essays because they, and I especially like Amena, the way she looked at the grassroots and what's happening in Bangladesh in that. And then the section on women, peace and security, in which Veena De Costa and Swati Prasha, they ask really, I think, a very important question, that are we ready for decolonization? And that it's not easy because, as they put it, it requires blood, sweat and tears, and they explain why. And also I think, in this essay, they don't just use words like militarization for the students. I thought they gave a very interesting kind of, not definition, one can't be bogged down by definitions because they're changing in its point of view ultimately, but they show how militarization, what kind of a process it is. So it's a very useful text in a way. Similarly, Shomita's case study of women, peace and security in South Asia, she sums it up very neatly. And then there are those case studies which intersect politics with culture. the drawings, wall drawings in Sri Lanka, for example, or the other essay from Sri Lanka which talks about the Muslim Marriages Act and the debates around it within. So ultimately, I'll conclude here, and I think there are 5 points or 6 points which are important, which I feel about this book. One, that it intersects between gender politics, materiality, culture, and the epistemological. Second, it delves into the past, into the medieval and the present, without any value judgments, which sometimes feminists are blamed for being very virtuous. Third, it shows the specificities in South Asia, but also the common links, the specificities of experience, and yet that experience can be transposed into another South Asian country and it would a lot of similarities. Fourth, it reveals the sites of oppression, the sites of possibilities, and the sites of hope. Very often they are in the same place. Fifth, it contextualizes the present and shows a path to the future. These were the 5 points I had, but when I was just again going through it when I came, I put in a 6th and final point, and that it theorizes and conceptualizes without being very heavy. So congratulations to both the authors, and I hope all of you would really read the book. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for sharing your insights and this book to further reveal and unravel the nuances and the richness of this volume. I would like to now invite Dr. Shruthi, who is Assistant Professor of Social Sciences at Shiv, Nadar University. With her interest in political theory, international relations theory, politics of identity, symbolism, politics of space and city and gender studies, with a special focus in South Asia, Africa and West Asia. She has had this amazing teaching and research experience at Royal Holloway, which is London, School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. She was assistant professor at Lady Shri Ram College for Women, and she has also been teaching as she was a guest lecturer at St. Stephen's College. With just a few words about Dr. Shruthi Muraleedharan, I invite her to share her insights and views with us.
Thank you so much, Professor Chaturvedi. And in fact, I want to start off with the point that Chaturvedi sort of started off the introduction to the whole panel, as well as the start of this event, book launch as well, which was this whole idea of the vision that the university has with regard to, in terms of intellectual curiosity, the meeting point in terms of thinking about South Asia as a region. And on the other hand, the other point that he talked about with reference to feminist aspirations in the space of a university like this, along with the last point that he talked about, which is to think about critically the aspect of the international and to engage with it, especially from a feminist lens. And I think what this book is trying to do is to get all of that together in terms of giving primary importance to the idea of location with reference to the South Asia region, emphasizing on the lens of the South Asian post-colonial feminist approach. And that is something that is very, very significant because of the larger ways in which mainstream IR feminist theorization, case studies, experiences have largely been focused on a particular kind of, which is of course also significant, but does not sort of do justice enough in terms of the variations of not just conceptual categories but also experiences which are much, much more complex, especially in the context of colonial encounter taken into account. So I think most significantly what this book does is to bring those questions and engagements into the fore. What I'm going to do in my presentation is sort of chart out what are the four basic ways in which we can think about the way in which the book is contributing to the larger conversation. And first and foremost, of course, is the politics of knowledge production and post-coloniality. And I want to sort of quote two things that come out as part of the, it's there in the book. One is, of course, the introduction where the authors are talking about the fact that, and I quote, it recognizes that the point of location of South Asia is particularly valid from the frames of coloniality and post-coloniality and intersectionality. And what Laura Shepard sort of comments that is how geography and epistemology are intertwined, and this is exactly what the collaboration sort of translates into in the book. As far as the first two very solid chapters sort of engage with, I think there are two crucial binaries that the first two chapters seem to challenge. One is the binary that get constituted from the point of view from an inherently masculine bias that exists in IR with regard to the question of who produces knowledge, which invisibilizes women theorists and sources. And the second highlighted by feminist post-colonial theorists such as Xavier and Chaturvedi, and post-colonial IR scholars like Shantanu Krishna, the binary between the Western and the non-Western IR, where there is already a substantial abstraction that works with reference to knowledge production itself. And more significantly, I think one of the points that Chandramohanty makes, the argument that she's making, not only about the variations and diversities that exist in third world feminism, but also emphasizing on the fact that it's very significant to bring about the epistemological interventions and complexities that third world women bring. And that's precisely is significant for also to sort of challenge the object status for third world women within IR feminism. And in that context, this book is actually doing that, which is to make that epistemological intervention. And I would again also quote the first two chapters, specifically Dr. Shweta's chapter, which sort of talks about, which is titled Can Feminists Hear Differing Voices? A critical reading of feminist histories in South Asia, reification and boundaries, and Dr. Medhavish's chapter, A Feminist Depth, conversation between feminist and non-Western thought. And both of them sort of course, are moving away from the predetermined epistemic, frameworks within which one has to think about what is considered to be agential, what is to be considered as a source of information. So what Dr. Shweta does is to sort of course, refer to the Buddhist, the Theravada Buddhist canonical text, which is situated in a particular kind of socio-political ancient India, and tries to cull out a feminist vocabulary, which could also sort of juxtapose and add to the existing way in which South Asian women sort of have negotiated different kinds of power equations. And similarly, Dr. Medhavish, when she's drawing attention to the notion of the feminist depth, which is an important reminder again to politics of knowledge creation, and where she's mainstreaming the idea of non-Western and indigenous knowledge systems by looking at Hindu and Buddhist texts. And it becomes important then to sort of bring into the aspect of how this kind of engagement with sources which are quite not the mainstream, even within third world feminism, sort of helps us to think about, and that would be a question that I would want Shweta to sort of respond to as well. That in terms of thinking about both the sources sort of challenging conceptual frameworks, so what has been impediments or constraints that one has thought with regard to those kinds of conceptual categories when one is trying to bring out newer forms of agential aversion, and also the other would be to think about bringing marginal sources into the mainstream for conversations and discussions. The second thing that I thought was running through many chapters was also the link between gender, militarism, and masculinity. So while there is, one of the things that the book is able to do is to Of course, we know that femininity and masculinity are co-constitutive, but there is a certain kind of consistency in certain aspects of how masculinity is being constituted in at least 3 chapters that I could sort of draw connection with. And I mean, on the constitutional masculinity in South Asian context, and I mean, of course, feminist scholars who already established a particular kind of framework, which involves, of course, Chenoy, Nirmanchanda, Vasu, Parashar, and sort of looking at the interactions of militarizations with masculinity. The patriarchal values bringing to the fore such intersections of varied ideologies in producing gender, social, cultural hierarchies and practices. The male body as a site of similarity with masculinity, Pashtun masculinity, and Gorkha identity and neutralization, respectively, is something that we see in particularly 3 chapters. So, Dr. Anushka's chapter on Sri Lanka, which brings into attention the privileged position of a warrior masculinity in a highly militarized Sinhala Buddhist society. And she highlights the construction of the warrior military masculinity as the hegemonic masculinity of the Sinhala Buddhist society, which significantly impacts the highly militarized political milieu and the people's daily lives as represented in the wall arts. Deepti Tamang's very, very interesting chapter, which looks at unpacking militarization narratives from the Darjeeling Himalayas, where she sort of brings into the colonial imagery of the Gorkhas as deer soldiers, being carried forward into the post-colonial, and of course how that also has a symbolic significance with the way in which the kukuri is used as a weapon of war in the military, and also becomes a part of the assertion within the entire mobilization that takes place in Darjeeling. So that was a very, very interesting chapter to look into the way in which marginal ideas or marginal locations also shape a particular kind of militarization. Dr. Yusuf's chapter also, which explores the nexus of exclusion based on the analysis of Pakistan's rural Pashtun society, which is also very interesting because, if I had an opportunity, I would have liked to sort of ask him in terms of thinking about how there is already a particular way in which Pashtun masculinity is rooted within the larger, broader global framework, and while this chapter sort of reinforces a particular way in which masculinity militarization sort of plays out, is there a possibility to also think about an alternative framing because of course, his own expertise in that particular field. The third, and which is something that I'm very much interested personally as well, is to is to look at the visual aesthetics, the repertoires, and the visual methods that have been used, particularly in Anushka's and Deepti's chapters. The way in which Anushka is referring to war murals and graffiti is also something that is very significant because of the fact that the visual turn in the IR discipline has been trying to look at different other sides of knowledge production, and in that sense to look at the way in which different frameworks of whether it is nationalism, populism, and militarization, how it sort of uses a different site, and I mean it is very graphic. The way in which she's written it, and I was curious as to why she did not end up using photographs, or sometimes sources as Deepti has managed to do. And that's where the other part of the methodological intervention comes in. Because the fact that she's used images is one of the ways in which you can actually tap on visual methods in telling a larger story. And that's something that is empirically there in her case, in her chapter, very well done. Lastly, I think overall the book is very rich in terms of its methodology and sources, which is very, very interesting to sort of look at the kind of various sources that has been brought in, and that of course not only builds upon the question of course intersectional methods and the question of reflexivity, but also the way in which this richness adds to the larger conversation in terms of thinking about various broader paradigms that the book is trying to do. So whether it is historical texts to legal frameworks to visual sources, there is a lot in terms of methodological diversity. And that again, and I end with that. And that again sort of builds up on the larger intention that this collaboration was aimed at. And so many congratulations to both the authors and the contributors. To the larger, again, circling back to the two aspects that was aimed at sort of anchoring. One is the colonial, post-colonial perspective combined with feminist intentions, and the collaboration itself, which sort of builds upon feminist reflexivity. So, congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies. I wrote it myself. Given us some insights. Also bringing us closer to mainstream international values. Now I want to invite someone who is known extensively, highly engaged scholar, who has been working on connectivity issues. Dr. Constantino Xavier, who is a senior fellow in the Foreign Policy and Security Strategy Center for Social and Economic Progress. He has been writing on questions of regional power, security, democracy across South Asia and the Indian Ocean region, with a special focus on state capacity, regional institutions, economic diplomacy, and soft power. He has been teaching at various institutions across the world. As I invite you, Dr. Xavier, to share your insights with us, and having listened to the earlier panelists, the thought that just crossed my mind was, and I thought I would just place it before you give your contribution, and that is because it relates to connectivity. Then I think feminism, as I get the South Asia, which told that faces not only the challenge of being post-colonial, but also being post-partition. Because that post-partition being is a very wounded being, where it becomes very difficult for you to get rid of that baggage of very painful memories. And how feminism then turns from that very negative, pessimistic, fear-inducing narratives to hope and optimism. And I think this is where a scholar who has been working on, who has given us excellent scholarship on connectivity. I think we are also reminding us that connectivity is not an end in itself, but it is also a means on how feminism and gender perspectives can take us closer to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I was just thinking it's wonderful to people. Just such a nice room, such a great place, such a great time to spend it out. Such a great occasion to get out of there. Be busy every day. Totally worth it. I mean, just what a wonderful time to be here together with friends, my RD partner. We've all shared a journey. We share a journey still. Phenomenal. Congrats to you, the leadership at SCU, for attracting people to your department, for retaining them. Not easy in this day and age to retain talent excellence models. And I think as the President said, so many persons making them do more than just teaching. Research. I think that's also a luxury these days. Forget anything, forget something worldwide for higher education. Professionals and professors to get time to research, collaborations and outputs, which is this beautiful that people give us is a thing. So for the students, I just think if you haven't read the book, read it. In any platform you want, read it on your phones, read it on wherever you want. Buy it ideally. But the book will take you on a journey. And I think that's the best way I can help promote this book. You must read this book. Many of these contributing authors are students and professors of the SCU, so your colleagues and mentors. engage with it by reading these chapters. And think of it as a journey, because every chapter will take you somewhere in time, in space, in theory, and ideology. You will really take you across these 4 dimensions of very different places. And I love books that take me places because it's sad to be in the same place. It's always nice to travel with a book, because it has so many voices, so many perspectives, it really takes you to different geographies, ideologies, concepts, and times in the current. So what I thought just of doing today, because I'm not equipped to comment on the state of feminists in India, South Asia, I was learning a lot from many people there and from this book. I wanted to connect this a little bit to what next. And one word that's been talked a lot about is collaboration. This is really a monumental exercise in regional cross-border collaboration in the form of co-editors, in the form of authors that are communicating to and with each other about producing their respective things. And I thought of how can we take this journey further? I know that at least essay you can think about this regional collaborative dimension. People from different countries, as Professor was telling us, coming together to look at the same issue and contributing to it from different angles. I think the starting question I have is a puzzle that's preoccupying me. I think Professor Chenoy mentioned, which is why are we relatively less connected today than we were 20 or 15 years ago? In terms of the research community in this region. I think that this university is actually an attempt, it was an initiative to correct it, and to accelerate it. I think in relative terms, we are slowing down. We have slowed down because of regional collaborations, the voices, the people that meet, the academics that connect, that write books such as these. We are slowing down. And that is puzzling. It's easier than ever to travel across countries. It's easier than ever to communicate. And here we are, 20 years later, compared to 2000. Actually, in terms of intensity and frequency of engagement with scholars from Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, why not India, many other countries and regions across the region, we're not connecting to each other. We're not doing enough. Actually, we are doing more with the rest of the world than within the world. Today I go to Dhaka Global last week. The universities there, the think tanks there are very well connected to Australian universities and think tanks, Japanese, American, European. And somehow, intra-regionally, we have, I think, dropped the ball. So the 4 questions I want to ask, if you share, you read this puzzle that I'm making today, maybe not, but we can discuss the indicators of this. That your part here, you know, in the 2000s, where all this was happening. Hopefully you agree. But if so, there are 4 questions I'd like to make you embark on the journey of unity with Muslim. And Shweta, if you want to take this further, which I think the beginning of that research project that may help us. So there are questions, so there are many answers. I have my possible answers, but many possible answers was accepted. There are 4 lines, the first 4 questions. The first one is, what are we connecting on? Including in this book. What are we researching collaboratively on? What is the subject of regional feminist IR studies in South Asia? And I think in the past, let's say 20 years ago, and maybe still a lot in this book, a lot of focus was on the language of politics, human rights, individual security, human security, which is very important. I think must be there and is structural. But I was wondering if there are other topics that we can start also working on a little bit more, including feminist. I was thinking of more transversal issues, maybe about larger development issues in terms of the economic development trajectories that this region sees, the role of technology, health, and education from international relations. The issue of cross-border comes up in the book. There are chapters that look at that, but more of the border studies agenda as also the same agenda. transnational movements and how women and gender plays an important role in that. The diaspora comes up again in some chapters, but I think it's also very fertile agenda. We take look at the region in diaspora in South Asia. And then broadly, therefore, a larger agenda that looks at beyond the strict political, individual, rights-based agenda of feminism. That's the first question. What are we connecting on? What can we connect more on? Very interesting agenda. We can probably exchange views. The second is where. What places are we connecting? Today we connect here at South Asian University. But where are the places? Where's the institutional infrastructure to take this agenda forward? I'm happy we're doing this today. But I don't know how many more institutions today in South Asia, Shweta, like constantly remind us. Not in, with all respect, from Seoul, Paris, New York, Canberra, which are great places we must visit. But within the region, where are the physical spaces? Forget even intellectual, like the physical spaces for us to do. If we're not getting visas to travel, if we don't have rooms like this one hosting us, leadership like the one we heard in the opening panel encouraging us to do more of this. So I think that's the second question. Where do we meet in the region? It's not only universities, this could be also the border states, this could be small state universities across our respective, subnational high education universities. It could be Rajshahi, it could be Guwahati. Right? So I think where do we need to take this agenda forward is very important. We must continue pressing for all supporters to find us and give us a space for it. The third question is, who is it that we are, who is it that we are connecting with? So who are the scholars part of this exercise? And there's an interesting, I think, part by Professor Kata. She mentioned something about the rise of populism. There again, is it possible to think of feminist South Asian hierarchy without engaging in any form with the conservative populist movements that are taking over or in the cockpits of politics? I don't know, it's a difficult question, but how do we engage with those women and the allies we have in our lives? Or is it a lost cause? I'm not sure. I think two or three authors addressed this in their chapters, and I welcome it, which I think is an important question, because if we live in our silos insulated from ideological movements that we do not like, where's the progressive in South Asia, subcontinent, and the feminist IR, if we are insulating it to all those who speak, look, think alike? National discussion about openness. And I like a lot of the authors. I think it was Afreen who mentioned before as mapping and excavating also history, voices that we don't know exist. So this excavation process and mapping is very important to understand. There may be many more elements beyond the corridors that we all traverse and take down the natural one. Finally, the last question is, why are we connecting on a feminist IR agenda? It seems very obvious, but I think there's two groups, and I think these voices come up in each other. There's an activist normative agenda, a political agenda, to change thought, to change the way we teach and think. That's a very legitimate and important agenda. Academic exercise as an activist advocacy voice. There's a second equally legitimate that I'm a little bit more biased to, so maybe I'm going to spend more time at university. But it's an analyst voice. The voice of, again, excavation, mapping, and driven by evidence. The rational approach to say, here's why it matters for a matter. And I think, Shweta, you mentioned recently in your table, the importance of this process of mapping, the experience in our respective geography itself, which is critical. And that can only be done with proof, which is evidence, which the social scientist translates as empirics. Many forms of empirics. be field work, could be data, could be archival history, but we need to do more of that. So you can sense my bias, maybe others don't have. Both are legitimate, both are important, but I think the urgency of the day is to do more of that empirical, evidence-based research for feminists, whether it's on the women peace and security agenda and analyzing the positions of different states, whether it's in the cross-border regions of Northeast Asia, with the works of Bhutan, Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, and how there we have played an extremely important actor as economic players, for example, talk to wide connected matters, more than just needs. So with that, I'll end just to say that these are maybe four questions that we can engage this amazing book invites us to. At least it invited me to think about what could be the next future research in this. I hope many of you disagree with some of the questions that I asked, these four questions, because I think that's probably what will lead to a very fertile research and repositioning this important exercise here at South Asia University, but also in this region. Thank you.
Very, very much. We must through the book, across the book, but also beyond the book. It's always very, very helpful and speaks volumes to the merit of the work that has been done. Slowing down, following out, and I think a very, very important observation about ripping away of the spaces that we need for articulation. Thank you very much. Let's go back to the book now. Let's go to those who have contributed to this work. And we all know that patients matter, as we were lacking this point earlier. All authors come from certain locations, and we also have to know as authors that by the time you complete your learning, you have relocated yourself in very meaningful ways. So I will now first of all invite Professor Sruthi Russia. Amazing interests, research ethics, post-colonialism, violence, author of these wonderful books, Camilla, the Jesuit experiment of the Ramka Cambridge University Press, and co-author of Dripping, Cutting, Stitching, Feminist Knowledge, Instruction, and Creative Politics. And she's the lead editor. So please tell us about your journey as the author of this book and what that really has.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi, first of all, for organizing this. And it's great to be among colleagues, friends, people that I have known for a number of years, students that I see, and the authors, co-authors who have been part of this book, Professor Mohsin and Shweta. Congratulations, this is fantastic. This is, I think, one of the first times in South Asia to have a feminist collection. And also with intergenerational scholarship that we see. So what you guys have achieved is what we were hoping for a very long time. So huge congratulations. And book launches are not the time to actually talk about books, but to what we have written, because that you can actually read. It's the time to celebrate. And I just want to reflect on the two questions that you gave us, Shweta. But in the spirit of this gathering, right? And I think we heard in the previous, Professor Chenoy talked about how difficult these times are, right? Everywhere, and we are meeting in the midst of a backlash, all sorts of backlash, right? So this kind of a gathering itself is a privilege. What it means to be in this room to talk about academia, collaborations, friendships, feminist histories, it's really a great sense of achievement, a great sense of progress. So let's just celebrate, just feel good about being here. And I also want to use this opportunity to pay so many debts to women at the table. There is somebody sitting on that panel, Professor Chenoy, who has been a mentor, a guru encouragement, the kind of mentoring we receive. So very, very grateful to you, ma'am. I met you after many years. It's a debt that we absolutely so grateful that to be part of that journey. Okay, so a couple of quick things I want to point out. One is about language, and I know that we don't have a lot of time. Constantino, I want to first take on what you said. Those who like that is, how do you kind of realize the world can have different voices, and how do you kind of bring those voices together, not constantly produce, talk to each other, where everyone is talking with the same voice. I kind of get that provocation a little bit. And it's reflected a little bit in my own work, because I have been really concerned about how little we talk to differences, with differences. And I think it's so frightening that we all have to be situated in certain kinds of gaps. If you transgress, if you are not situated in a position of positioning, then it's not a happy moment. So it's important to embrace this book in that spirit of difference, because all the authors here, if they sit together, there wouldn't be agreements on many things that that we think through, right? So difference is important to recognize. I also recognize the problem of English language. This is a versatile medium, so many languages. English is the unifying language. It's also a colonial term, which is something that I became sensitive to working in Sweden for the last 8 years. And I'm learning Swedish, and English, they don't like us speaking English. Our classrooms, we do have to use English because we have international students, but the idea of preserving Swedish. Europe is very, very nationalistic on its languages, but here I'm also thinking of our region as a region that celebrates so much diversity in languages. So in that sense, we limit ourselves when we just think about English as the only means of communication and what we leave out, right? This book is about what you see in the pages, but also what you don't see. So it's important to think about that, and through that you can think about different kinds of projects that you can undertake in the future, and in conversations with what you do. The two questions that you gave us very quickly: journey of writing your chapter, what was it, and how do you think about the contribution that this book makes? What is the central focus of your own work? Collaboration, everyone has talked about it. It is so critical, and the chapter that I have written with Costa here is on women, peace and security. And we have been friends for a really long time now, and she is based at Australian National University. Also happens, Meena is our teacher as well, and Meena is professor of international relations, also working closely with you, and we have been friends for a long time. So a lot of teachers, mentoring going on here. But Meena and I have been, and we come with that idea that we are located in the West, in Western universities, in Western academia. We access different kinds of debates. So although we are South Asians, right about South Asia, we are culturally located in the region. But the debates that we are exposed to might be very different from what my colleagues here are looking at. So for us, it was the most frustrating thing on women, peace and security has been how it has been taken, off. It has taken off in a manner that we feel very uncomfortable with. It is one of the, it has a very neoliberal kind of agenda. It gets the most funding. Anything we want to work on, the UPS for a long time got a lot of funding. Not sure right now though, with the way things are changing, but there was no dearth of funding. And I spent a number of years in Australia where you wrote any application, you just got funded. So there's a certain kind of whiteness, a global north feminism that dominates the WPS agenda. So we wanted to center that in our chapter, and I think if you go through some of the other works that Meena and I have written, also on WPS and feminists, I think have been very critical of this idea that feminism starts and ends with the global north. And I think you do wonderfully well in that first chapter to point out what came from the north, what we learned from, but how in South Asia it's not. IR itself is not taught everywhere, but how we take IR from many different disciplines, from many different, the way you trace the genealogy of feminist IR from different kinds of books and storytelling and narratives of passion and all of that. And I think that's really important to consider, that IR is not IR everywhere. So we question the way the language works, for example, feminism.
right? We don't even have consensus on that in the region. It's Western, it's colonial. If I take a hand county, a lot of people say, oh, I don't understand, it's very, it makes people uncomfortable. And we cannot acknowledge that and say that very often we may not use that language, but although we have progressed a great deal when it comes to thinking through issues that feminism talks about. So what is it about the semantics? The politics of using certain words. South Asia itself, when we question that as well, what is South Asia? For a very long time, it continues to be that in the global north, South Asia is just India and Indian scholars. And I have been, lucky to be part of many such discussions where I have, maybe I have also not made people comfortable when I've said that Indians need to step back. There have been panels and panels on Bangladesh, for example, to mark its liberation war, and there would be just Indian scholars on that panel, And this I'm talking about the embassy, I'm talking about institutions like so. So every time there is South Asia collective, it's dominated by Indians. And I think we successfully dismantled that in this book. If you see the contributors here. So in our chapter, what we were hoping is to raise questions about how we take things for granted. WBS, women, peace and security, feminism, everything. We just kind of embrace and think this is it. But we have the vantage point of questioning that and saying that this doesn't work for us or works for us, and we have different histories that we can draw from. So this is something that we tried to do. The book for us was a collaborative journey, not just in terms of how we all know each other and we have worked with each other for a long time. But for Veena and I, these were conversations that we've had for such a long time. It's frustration, it's all the ands that you put together in words. It was important for us to write this in the spirit that we also have a lot of differences. So collaborative journey that you asked us is also filled with differences. We don't agree with everything, but we were able to do this work together. Finally, I want to say that this book is born, out of grief, friendships, and a lot of collaborative enterprise. Right? People have taken initiatives, resilience. Right? This work is very much South Asia because this is what defines the region, right? There have been personal bereavements. People have been part of this book journey, have experienced. There has also been a great deal of resilience. This is pre-COVID and post-COVID, and how it has taken a long time to even bring this to fruition. So it's important to acknowledge that it's truly South Asia in that sense. So use it for teaching as well, an important teaching resource, not just that it is a research book that chapters about research, but please use it for teaching. And finally, I want to close with this, just South Asia and how to talk about poetry. Parveen Shaki, who is a famous, very well-known, died under very unfortunate circumstances, Pakistani poet who I really a lot. So, he कुछ तो this is what feminism to me represents in this region. A book like this represents how it has challenged patriarchy, and it says कुछ तो तेरे मौसम ही मुझे रास कम आए. So कुछ तो तेरे मौसम ही मुझे रास कम आए और कुछ मेरी मिट्टी में बगावत हुई थी. Thank you so much.
May I now invite my colleague from the classroom, who has published in gender and she is the lead editor
Many thanks to the editors of the volume, Professor Xavier and Dr. Shweta Singh, for bringing us all together in very difficult circumstances, and then for this volume and all the patience that you demonstrated at that time. I'm grateful also to be part of this initiative to take forward the conversations that have been a very important part of the evolution of feminist thinking in South Asia. Constantino mentioned the early 2000s when those were the heydays of these conversations, sort of
visiting each other, and I was working with an organization called Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace prior to starting my doctoral research. And this is based in New Delhi, but focused on foregrounding perspectives of South Asian women and really pointing to women's role in advancing peace and security in South Asia. And now, while much of my sort of current research and writing focuses on the United Nations, I remain inspired by the strength, resilience, empathy, creativity of the people I met during that work. So whenever I'm sitting very late at night struggling with a piece of work, I tell, and what is the point of it at all? Is anyone even going to read it? I remind myself of the experiences that I had now more than 20 years ago. This is not to say that we all agreed. There was a lot of difference among the women who were speaking to each other, women and men, and indeed others. But in my chapter, I work with the idea of feminist South Asia, that there is a community that can be described as feminist South Asia. That's a departure point that I'll briefly speak to as well. The book itself, it brings together academics and practitioners, as you know by now, from all across South Asia. There's not only geographical diversity, but also an intergenerational meeting of minds. My panel, for instance, had speakers from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. Unfortunately, Dr. Rubina Saibal from Pakistan, who was to chair our session when it was initially to take place in early 2000, she passed away during the pandemic before the conference could even take place. And I have been very inspired by her work when I worked with WISCOM. And even during the few months of conversations that we had, she was so understanding and really spoke to the fact that we have all these four mothers, as it were, in South Asia as well, who continue to inspire the work of sort of our generation of feminist scholars and practitioners in South Asia. Before I move on again to speak about my contribution, I want to take a moment to speak specifically as a teacher at the South Asian University here. I know most of you, as you know, we aim to foreground South Asian perspectives in the study of international relations. And I've shared with you also, as students, the frustration of being able to find texts that we can assign as readings when we are teaching international relations. So I'm very grateful that we have this book now, because it's going to be a great teaching resource. So thanks very much for that. And now I'll put on my researcher hat. The invitation from Shweta and Professor Mohsin gave me the opportunity to turn inwards. So a lot of my work on women, peace and security is pitched at the level of global politics, especially what goes on at the United Nations. So that's one part of it. And on the other side, as I said, very quietly have also been part of what I describe as feminist South Asia. I wouldn't call myself as an activist. I'm pretty certain I'm not. But I listen to activists a lot. I talk to them. Professor Mohsin and I were at a conference in Bangalore last week, and I met a civil society practitioner from Nepal who works on women, peace and security, a UN practitioner from Sri Lanka who works on women, peace and security, and of course Professor Mohsin has herself done work on women, peace and security in Bangladesh. So as an IR feminist scholar working on WPS, these understandings of the work that is being done in different parts of South Asia has been very important. And I've also been able to identify, on the one hand, the specificity of the national and local context, and on the other hand, the global dimensions of it as well. So in my research, in this particular chapter, I consider what the international domain, specifically the influential women, peace and security agenda, entails for feminist peace work in South Asia. the WPS agenda is associated with UN Security Council resolutions, and that policy architecture emerged only in 2000, which is 25 years ago. But feminist peace work in South Asia and the rest of the world, of course, has a much longer history, and therefore it is, as students of IR, it's interesting for us, and I think Sruthi also pointed out, how much of an influence WPS agenda has, how much of an influence it has been in the workings of WPS in South Asia. Well, I won't go into what I actually say in the chapter, but essentially there were two departure points. One, that the region has been significant for conceptualizing and working towards realizing gender-just peaceful societies in South Asia, and an interconnected feminist community has emerged over the last several decades to highlight and respond to shared concerns regarding gender violence and armed conflicts. And the second departure point was that all this work is taking place in an increasingly globalized world, so the international matters a lot. And in my analysis, I focused on the ways in which this international has both served as a resource and also undermined feminist peace work in the region. And so essentially the WPS agenda is kind of illustrative of the tangled web of opportunities and constraints, both ideational and material, that the international has to offer to feminists in the region. And the other part that I really liked about having written this chapter is that it's part of a very diverse set of ideas on WPS in South Asia. There's an entire section. So I'm very glad that thanks to Shweta and Professor Mohsin, we were able to have this conversation, and I hope that we continue to do so in the near future. Thank you.
Works at Azad Foundation, where she's a thematic lead on research policy and communication. She has been working with researchers in different parts of the world, including the US, and working on climate change.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chaturvedi. I'd like to begin by saying thank you, Shweta, Professor Mohsin, and South Asian University for having me here today. And also, more importantly, for Shweta and Professor Mohsin to invite us, me and Nandini, to write this chapter. I'm saying this because I and Nandini have been working together for some time, but I guess we never worked in this space which we call as the South Asian space, which we've been talking about for the last 2 hours. So I'm really thankful for that, and I think that was one of the reasons why me and Nandini came together for this. She was, I think at that point of time, very busy, and she was skeptical also about this, but I said, no, we should actually work together on this particular project because it is about South Asia, and we somehow pulled it off, I must say. And we know it's been a long journey. We've all talked about it. Shweta has also talked about it, and everyone else. But it's been a span of, say, 4 or 5 years that we've been working on this, and a lot of things that have happened, around that time. So I'll briefly talk about the journey first, and I think the journey of writing this chapter has been, for most of us and for us as well, more than just an intellectual exercise in exploring populism and gender in India. It has been a deeply feminist and collaborative process for both me and my co-author Nandini, who couldn't join us today. She's also a fellow feminist and co-traveler, thinker. This work has been about creating a space where diverse voices can be heard with confidence. And I'm saying this because, a lot of the spaces we collaborate, but can we all speak what we want to speak is something that's a question. And I think in this space, we both felt very space grounded in a shared understanding that knowledge is enriched through multiple perspectives. And this volume really is about that, because it's not just IR, but we both are political scientists and still part of this. Our collaboration has been shaped not just by our academic interests, but also by the distinct social and political contexts we come from, making it a dynamic process of learning and unlearning. I would say beyond scholarship, this collaboration has allowed us to strengthen regional and shared yet diverse feminist experiences that define our personal and professional journeys. My work as a feminist researcher and author from India, I think I moved 2 places by the time this work got finished, and even Nandini came to India in between and she went back to the US. They're shaped by our own lived realities within the country. Just as Nandini's perspectives are informed by her experience as an Indian feminist who's now based outside India and the US and working closely on Indian political issues. So these different vantage points have not only influenced how we view the world, but have also enriched our analysis of performative leadership among male and female populist figures in India. I would say what really makes this volume unique, which a lot of us also spoke about previously, is about that it is beyond geographical borders, to find intersectionality in our intentions, and I want to emphasize the word intention here, an understanding of social structures that connect South Asian women globally. This collaboration is not just about producing knowledge, therefore, it is also about feminist solidarity, friendship, and sisterhood that transcend national boundaries. The relationship I really share with Nandini, with Shweta, other co-authors, I think this is something that has just been instrumental in bringing this chapter together. We all know what we went through during the pandemic, and I don't want to really talk about our own personal loss and other things, but then that really brought us strengthened, and made this conviction that we can do this together. This volume to me, therefore, is an example of how feminist collaborations are, as much as about building knowledge, as they are about creating and sustaining meaningful connections and collective resistance. Basically, now I'm trying to turn to our chapter, and I'm sure some of you have read it, students who have not read it, and others who have not read it. I would just say that we really explored performance of male and female populist leaders across both national and regional political landscapes in India. We do that together. A lot of other volumes do. They just emphasize on the national or the regional. Through a feminist lens on gender and populism, a connection that we feel was largely unexplored. Our analysis was particularly, for me at least, was fascinating as it revealed how sexuality, familial ties, and gender identity shape the public personas of these leaders. For instance, the female political or populist leaders are meticulously crafted as chaste figures, reinforcing traditional expectations of virtue and reality. Meanwhile, male populist leaders from regional parties strategically oscillate between hyper-masculine, sexy imagery and chaste, disciplined identities, leveraging both to consolidate their peak. So, this is something that we thought was different because these are three analytical aspects that we look at. Therefore, a key theme that emerged how populist leaders, regardless of gender, adopt rebellious, anti-establishment, sometimes personas, to forge deep connections with their supporters. So this was something that we wanted to really look at. And we're thankful that we got this opportunity through this chapter to do that. Also, the familial connections that the female populist leaders invoke, positioning themselves as, say, for example, Didi, Amma, Mother India, Behenji, to establish authority and legitimacy. In contrast, the male populist leaders, some of the female, also construct an enigma, aura, like temples being constructed and other things. So one of the crucial arguments, and I think Professor Chenoy also mentioned, regardless of who performs this, populism, it's tied to varying degrees of masculinity, and we can differ about this, and it's great that we do, and we can have a dialogue about this as well. And that inherently reinforces patriarchal structures. This framework offers a fresh perspective on the gender nature of populist politics and its implication for leadership, all forms of leadership, not necessarily populist. So therefore, we thought that this work, maybe looking ahead, can, through these three analytical categories of the performance of gender, sexuality, and familial ties and leadership, can be extended to examine other forms of leadership performances beyond populism. And we thought that this would be a right way in which the research can look ahead. Again, thank you so much for having me here, Shweta.
I would now like to invite Afreen, who is she's been directly to title this absolutely incredible chapter by Sabha Burkhardt on perpetual silencing and continuous questioning. And one of the silences that she addresses is what she called historic women. She brings a lot of insights in her work, and I will now invite her.
Good afternoon, everyone. I may fumble, I'm really nervous, but it's an absolute privilege for me to be here and to share the same stage as these wonderful editors and all the contributors. I'm truly grateful to be part of this terrific book. And of course, this goes without saying that Shweta here, who's also my supervisor now, has been an incredible support. She made my first academic contribution almost very, very easy and smooth process for me. And this chapter that I've written, it's in fact was a term paper for one of the courses that she taught me in my master's, which was Feminist International Relations in South Asia. And many of my thoughts started developing during that period. I still remember that she taught how feminist IR in South Asia is marked by the 3 Ds that she just mentioned. There's this dialogue with global north, there's dissidence, and there's also differences as well. To contribute to the conversation that we're having, I believe that this volume dwells into this historical roots of feminist thought in South Asia, which obviously meant going beyond the conventional focus on Western feminist theory, something that Shweta also mentioned in her chapter when she points out that the attempt has been made to locate the early feminist vocabulary. So, and chapters like that explores ancient texts like Tirikata, or if I talk about my own chapter, where I'm looking at these letters by ancient figure Jahanara, written in the 17th century, and looking at how she thought, or her thoughts or her opinion on some of the key concepts that are now the cornerstone of international relation, like security or war. So it also demonstrates how feminist engagement with international relation actually predates the formal establishment of the discipline itself. So this historical grounding that the volume represents, I think it's really, really essential for our understanding of the origin of feminist IR in the region. And I had a wonderful time writing my researching and writing my chapter, and I really hope that you all have a happy and a curious read as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
I really look forward to the day when I'll be holding in my hands your book. It's really fascinating subject. Thank you very much. We are running late by about 15 minutes, but we started late. Now we have what is absolute must, and that is Q&A. And I'm sure both our panelists and the contributors have told you to ask your questions. I will request you to please ask in silence and directly as possible. So that the floor is open now, please. Oh, yes. I can't see you, please.
So, my name is Prof for the legal studies. My question is to Dr. Xavier. A case in the Supreme Court, and where Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer said that Indian bonds and suits are discriminatory against women, and the data part, that only 20% of ambassadors in Indian mission are women. So, from that point of view, my question is, where do we head from this in the feminist international relations, considering the ambassadors and diplomats are stakeholders in forming a policy and international relations? Thank you, sir.
My question is like, so I just wanted to ask that, does this book talk about the business that it was to keep feminist IR in South Asia as epistemologically, critical pedagogy very important. It challenged the mainstream theories and masculinist epistemology of neoliberalism. which itself is not an organic to South Asia. But for critical pedagogy, we don't have to indulge in the fake pedagogy as we have towards the science. Who can help us do this?
My question is addressed to Professor Anuradha. Ma'am, you mentioned about specificities in South Asia, but also having common base. So by now we have established that feminism to be one of those common base. But if you could also elaborate further, like what are the common base we have in South Asia?
Yes, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Kiran, a PhD candidate in Jindal. My question is the same, that the title of the chapter is very interesting and I hear different voices. And I think thinking about it and researching also looking at that, what could be other ways also? Like listening is one sense, I think seeing also is another one. But I was also thinking of smell, touch, taste. These are the senses that embody understanding of feminist idea, right? So that's a way forward, how we can go about it. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for asking a question on the role of gender in Indian diplomacy and the Indian foreign service in particular. Let me just explain why I think it's important, given what I said up there. Recently we had a discussion, for example, by institution with Dr. Shweta Singh Amena Mohsin, who's just finished her PhD on early pioneering women diplomats who represent India and multilateral fora in Islamic countries. There was a very funny moment where she presented the data. You mentioned one data point. I think the number of women in the foreign service in the last two batches went up to 43%. But overall, the picture is not very good. She presented the work early findings of data. And then we opened up for discussion. There were 9 or 10 different, almost all women, not only, women diplomats from other embassies in other countries. And the Europeans, including the Norwegian woman, said, your data is actually not that bad. We actually have, on some indicators, you are way ahead of a country like Norway. It was shocking. People laughed in the room, and you say, no, you're not getting this. Like, I just looked at this data and I was thinking of Norway, and some issues we actually not doing well. So that's the first point I want to make. And I think situates with what Dr. Shweta was saying, that we need to map a little bit what's happening in this region. We need to theorize, conceptualize things also. But let's find out what the reality has been. But it's a lived reality of the foreign service officers, with all the ambiguities that are apparent. You mentioned seeing of a personal price of being a woman trying to serve the state in international politics. But also live realities on the ground. And to do that, we need that empirical excavation. Whether it's the National Archives of India, whether it's oral histories with the women that have served the state abroad, whether it's the archival work of the pre-colonial period, as we just heard from this wonderful chapter on the military, Jai work on that period have also taken, I think, a lot of that into the current thinking. Also field work on the border sites, the borderlands. This work was one, but there's phenomenal work waiting to be done, and again, mapping, visualizing the experiences of women from various angles in the border lands of the Indians bordering. So I'd say that, it's very important to do that. I think many of you in the room will hopefully do this and take this amazing research agenda, which is focused upon it, forward. And again, my appeal is to take it forward empirically. Something that is real. Theory is very important, theory development. But I think currently the need of the hour is to centralize the South Asian feminist experience by mapping it. And that will be done only under the mentorship of your amazing professors, but you have to choose it. Go to the field, whether it's the dusty archives, or the streets, or the interviews, or the diaspora, to map that. Okay? And you have very good examples of how to do this in this book.
Thank you, and I think Constantino has actually addressed a lot of the issues which have been raised by you all. But specifically on the issue of specificities, I think I would argue that the specificities are being imposed by states in this region. The commonalities like the experience of the colonial experience, the histories of the past, there were a lot of commonalities. It was like one system. And the specificities which have come have been imposed through new legal frameworks and the desire to be different and the desire to otherize the others. And the common links, and you put it very well, are ideas like feminism, ideas about development, ideas that are challenging, kind of impositions, let's say, by organizations to which the states need to follow, like let's say the World Bank. But there are commonalities. There's commonality amongst the fisher folks movement. There's a commonality amongst the farmers. You'll see there's a farmers movement here. There's a very strong farmer movement in Pakistan today. There are, so we have to look at for commonalities in people's movements, in social movements, in social justice. Because you're not going to find, I think, of course you can find commonalities with the state. The state would like to see those as other and themselves as distinct. So that's where I think you can look for commonalities.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy. And Harsh, in response to your question on critical pedagogy, I absolutely recognize that as a gap, and I think you're absolutely right. In fact, in another of the volumes that Sruthi and Katya, it was a project of feminist peace research, where I do look at the question of Savitribai Phule and what she brings on the table in the context of idea of international itself. But in this book, I think the way we are conceptualizing it, we really want to look at how this is taught in different contexts. So we'd be very curious to see how it translates as a critical pedagogical project. So that's one. Kiran, thank you for coming in. I know you're doing some interesting work, and I think just in response to your question, I think I'll agree with you methodologically there. Not just differing ways of listening or hearing, but also the politics of smell, the politics of seeing. And I think what Shruti was talking about in the beginning, the whole context of visual politics, and how do we really look at that? So that definitely really comes back to the question of the plurality of the epistemic frames that we're talking about. So thank you on that. And any other comments or questions? Closing remarks, as in Professor Mohsin, yes, we have two questions there, and then you can just take that. Please introduce yourself, and then.
Good evening to one of our present here. I'm Chaturvedi from the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. My question is specifically to Professor Shweta Singh. So my question is what are the, every book has produced some sense of epistemology, ontology, and the methodology. So my question is, what are the new epistemology this book emphasizes on by going beyond geography, and what is the understanding of geography that it brings forward by integrating the epistemology, ontology, and the methodology, as well as how this new epistemology or the epistemic intervention that the book does criticizes or engages with international relation, global law, and the mainstream. Thank you so much. The question right next there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Yash Sharma, and I'm a master's student of Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. My question is whether we are culturally, linguistically, racially, or emotionally connected, but we, the people of South Asia, are cartographically divided. And as a researcher, as a scholar in South Asia, it becomes very crucial or difficult for us to research in South Asia itself, because the cartography speaks about it. It's very difficult, and it becomes very, it becomes very difficult for us to pursue research in South Asia. Whether some people from different regions of the world, they can easily get access to different countries, but we cannot. So what are the research methods which have been used by different contributors and the authors of this book to pursue this project, and what should be the methodology that we should engage in order to pursue the research on South Asia, the critical perspective, or in order to challenge the mainstream international relations? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. I got the responses.
Thank you for both your questions. And I think going back to the question of epistemology, that was a very difficult question for both Professor Mohsin and me, because we were very attentive to the fact that we can't really talk about a universalizing epistemic frame. I think the story began, and I can talk about my own self here. The story for me was located in the politics of science. What do we recognize as legitimate and valid knowledge in the field of RI? And how do we actually start to problematize that? Because many of the erasures are really coming in from, and I think on that context, you see a diversity of epistemological and methodological standpoints, from archival research to visual politics, to looking at, going back to case study methods. So there is the diversity, that we were traversing. On the second question, I think I completely agree with you, and I think that is where the journey for us also began. The frustration of not being able to talk about a research agenda focused not just on South Asia, but also from South Asia. And I think this is how that was happening. So it was also the politics of knowledge production that we were very attentive to. And I think that's where the idea of collaboration was really coming in. So I think I agree with all the ideas that you're talking about. And I really don't think this is the end of a journey. And I think as you were talking about the 4 questions that you put for us, it is the beginning of a journey and how we translate that in terms of ideas. And I think on the point on cartographic anxiety, it's a privilege to have Professor Chaturvedi with us, who's been writing about the whole idea of cartographic anxieties in the context of South Asia. So I just give back the mic to him for his closing comments on the idea of cartographic anxiety.
Yes, please.
I think just one line, and just like this whole thing has come up, and Constantino said that South Asian feminists who have broken these cartographic anxieties, maps, and engaged. And so you can have different kinds of epistemic communities which don't need these, which can keep the borders out of their minds. So other communities, whether it's students and others, they can build on these epistemic communities, and I think that's what many of us here are going to say.
Thank you very, very much. I'm overwhelmed and very grateful for this, but also from this very rich panel discussion and the kind of questions that were being asked. I don't know how to overcome the cartographic anxieties that we see, not only in South Asia, but in many other parts of the world as well. But I do feel that you need a mapping that questions the cartography. How do we go for a meaning-making exercise that liberates us from this post-colonial, post-partition cartography of being a captivated being, if I may use that expression. I think politics of knowledge production is one aspect of it, but I think we should also be using another word with this, and that is the ethics and politics of knowledge production. Because after all, whenever there is a new knowledge, we also have to ask as to what kind of use we are putting that knowledge. And that perhaps would demand that we don't use the term journeys, because journeys still have something called destinations, but adventures. Because there's always this fear of charting the unknown. We do not really know what exists beyond the boundaries of our own knowledge, or non-knowledge, so to speak. So, another major takeaway, I did not realize that Prof. also makes a reference to Oxford report. It was just by chance that I found that she also knows about this report. And I think the inequalities are not only material inequalities, these are also emotional inequalities. By that I mean that I think we have too much of fear. We have really entered into a climate of fear. And perhaps that is the reason that some of us feel sometimes, somewhere, that perhaps we are going through or living through a very secularized century. And I think what this book has done, we talked about the anguish, we talked about the pain, we talked about the suffering, because when we went through this, the book's journey or adventure went through the COVID times. But I think you also need an epistemology that would heal the wounds. Because I think we also see a lot of hurt that continues to do a lot of harm to the project of integration in South Asia. And it's very recently, not very recent, but scholars of international relations have started paying attention to the role that emotions play. And I think one very important area where we want to see hope, we want to see empathy, we want to see various other positive emotions, I think is the feminist research. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the more feminist, gender-sensitive research we bring into our respective disciplines and also into policy making, I think we will see a more peaceful and hopeful South Asia. And the Institute of South Asian Studies, South Asian University, I think we have a very valuable space. We should cherish it, we should celebrate it. And I'm sure we should also be reminded of the fact that we live in that part of the world called the Indian Ocean world, where historically speaking, order was never derived out of uniformity, it was always derived out of diversity. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Shweta, Professor Singh, all the contributors to this absolutely amazing work. It's a very, very rich work. I'm sure we'll continue to be debated and discussed. Lastly, the work inspired us. And I will now request Dr. Shweta to please offer our closing comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi. And as I said, it is really not an end. It's not a closing comment. It's at the beginning of our adventures, it's the beginning of our journey. Thank you for being part of our adventures and our journey. And I'm hoping that many of you who are in this room, the fourth generation, would take many of these conversations forward. I want to, on record, express my deepest gratitude for all our panelists, Professor Chenoy, Dr. Muraleedharan, Dr. Constantino, our Dean and Vice President, Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi. And a big thank you to all the contributors and to my co-editor, Professor Amena Mohsin, who is here with us from Dhaka. And as I said, let's now continue our conversations over a cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you.